What's up YouTube, and welcome back to another Procreate tutorial where today we're going to go ahead and create this autumnal style design. Now, as always, there's links to everything that you're going to need in the description down below. I'll give you the canvas size. You can follow along with the same colors with the palette. They're all available over on my Patreon, and all of the requirements are completely free. So when you head over there, you can grab all the requirements, again, completely free on my Patreon. And while you're there, take a look at the catalog of exclusive tutorials I've got over there, where I've been posting 3 exclusive tutorials to my Patreon supporters every single month, and the catalogue sits at well over 100 at the time of recording. And you can actually take a look on my website at every single design of every single Patreon tutorial that I've made before you even join, so you can get a look at all of that content and see which ones take your fancy. So enjoy today's tutorial, take your time with it, enjoy the process, and with all that said, let's get started. So once you've created your canvas, we want to go ahead and first of all, just go up to your layers, go to your background color, and in the Autumn 1 palette, which is where we'll primarily start with, we're going to go ahead and grab this color here in the top right of the palette. Once we've done that, we can then go up to our actions and go to the canvas tab and turn on the drawing guide as I normally do, edit that drawing guide, and we will set the grid size to 500. So we've got a 2D grid set to 500 pixels, which is a quarter of our canvas. So then we get a 4x4 grid. You'll have to adapt the number, of course, depending on if you use a different grid size. So with that in play, you can now go ahead and lay out your design against mine, making sure that certain things are in the same position. So let's go ahead and go to our layers. Let's add in some basic shapes for all of the kind of stages of this, and then we'll get into detail in them. So on the empty layer, we'll go to our colors. We're going to go ahead and grab this color here. It's the middle of the second column from the right. We're going to go to our brush. I'm going to use the soft airbrush. So we're going to go into the option of airbrushing, soft brush, but we'll set the size really low. We'll set it down to about 2 or 1%, and we're going to need to press quite firm with it. Now we want to start off just around about up here in this space, and we want to end up sort of a little bit further down, maybe around about here. And you can just create whatever kind of landscape you want up here, some mountains and whatnot, swoops into some peaks. But as long as you start to draw the sort of the land down to a point at the end, that's perfect. And then you can drag and drop the color. Now make sure when you drag your color in, you hold, and you see at the very top up here, it says the option of threshold. You want to go ahead and drag it to the right just before it starts to spill out. You're really forcing the color up to the edges, and you shouldn't have a fuzzy line that way. Then let's go ahead and create another new layer. We're going to go to our colors, and we're going to grab the color, which is going to be this one here. It's the bottom of that second column from the right again. And we're going to draw in another hillside that's going to somewhat sort of overlap that. So it's going to come in from that corner there. And to a degree, it's going to run away and fall in behind here. And this one doesn't need to be anything like the last one. It just needs to become some sort of hillside down here. So you don't want it to be sort of too crazy or anything. You can add some bumps and lumps in there just to make it a little bit uneven. You can go ahead and just go sort of along here and off to the right hand side, pressing quite firm again, and then drag and drop the color in like so. We'll go to our layers, we'll create another new layer. We'll go to our colors, and we'll grab this color here, top left of the palette. And we're going to draw in our main hillside here on the left hand side. And that's going to come sort of down towards a point at the water's edge around about, say, here. And it's going to disappear off screen about here at the bottom, and it's going to come in from screen up here like so. So we're creating this kind of triangle shape, and you can go ahead and in there just create sort of bumps and lumps, cut across the end of that piece of land, and then go all the way to the water's edge, and then just create sort of an uneven ground like shape there against the water's edge, and then drag and drop the color in. And as long as you've got this kind of shape here, you're cutting off the corner there, you're perfect. You've got everything you need. The only thing you should then do is if you hold down on your eraser up here, it will switch it to the current brush that we were just using, which should be the soft airbrush under airbrushing. The only thing you might want to do is maybe set that down to like a 1 or 2% and just get into here and trim off the end so that we get a bit more of a point on the very end. And you can go along your shoreline if you want to as well to create like a bit more of a bumpy, lumpy. You can cut in at certain points if you want to and really sharpen up some edges, but don't overdo it. Something simple like this. Let's then go to our layer. We'll create another new layer, but we'll drag it underneath the last one we were working with. And we'll go to our brush again, making sure it's still airbrushing in the soft brush. And we're going to draw that in. Now it's going to come into the scene around about here, and it's going to make its way along here, and it's just going to dip in behind here. So you can sort of start here and then make your way up. Again, it's going to be just a normal, regular, somewhat piece of land. And then we can start off again right at the other end. So right at the starting point, come along and then just kind of bring it round the water's edge a bit more, like so. And again, drag and drop your color in. You can always adapt these shapes if you want to later, but ultimately that's your stream and river. So you can take a look at it again now and say, well, actually, would I like to widen that up using my eraser and just widen up the lake or river as it makes its way round out of the scene, out of our way. And to be honest, I'll probably adjust this one as well, but I'll leave it for a later point in the tutorial because we don't really need to do that right now. So we've got some real basic shapes there. I'm going to go ahead and start to flush them out a little bit, starting somewhat from the back. So we'll create a new layer and we'll drag it all the way to the bottom. And then we'll go to our colors. We're going to grab the middle color in the far right column. Brush still wants to be the soft airbrush under airbrushing, but we want to make it a lot bigger this time, probably up to around about, say, 35%. And we're just going to go along here, making sure that we just blend up towards the very top edge, leaving some dark blue, but allowing this kind of bluish tone to take over. And you can see I've left a little bit more on this top area up here. I'm then going to go to my colors and grab the color in the bottom right of the palette, and then just add in a bit of yellow here for the sun right down here at the bottom. So we're creating a lovely gradient of all the colors, the yellow all the way through into the blue. And I'm just bringing it across behind the land. So it's a bit of a diagonal here up into that top left corner. Let's go ahead and add in some clouds. Let's go to our layers. Let's create a new layer. While we're here, swipe from left to right on both of these and group them together and just rename the group and just call it sky. I always like to do that. It just makes things nice and organized. You can then go to your colors. We're going to go ahead and introduce the clouds. Now the clouds are actually in our Autumn 2 group. So you're going to want to go to your palettes. And in there, you want to grab the Autumn 2. And you can just go ahead and grab the top color here in that stack of the yellow tones up here. We'll go back to our disc. So this color here, top of the third column from the right. And we now want to go to our brush. We want to change it to artistic and the sassafras brush. I always struggle to say that. It's too many S's. Sassafras. And then we've got a size set to 11% and an opacity set to 64%. We're just going to draw in some very simple clouds with a bit of a kind of bowing shape towards the middle of it. So for example, I'm just going to kind of create some streaks through here. You can make your brush a bit bigger if you want to as well. Just sort of running through the sky, not too much. We can erase from it in a minute. And then on this high one up here, just create some sort of rounding shapes up here to just attach onto those cloud streaky lines in there, and then maybe a couple a little bit further back, but you want them to get smaller as they get further away. So maybe bring the brush size down and round out a few of those streaks just to add in a little something. Nothing too much, so keep it really simple. And then make your brush size back up to around about that 20% mark and just create a couple more sort of curling in from this way as well. So just a few streaking through as you make your way up towards here, a couple more sort of wiggles and wobbles just to create some fluffy cloud-like shapes coming in. And then we'll just create like a bit of a curve in the middle and just attach a cloud onto that, like so. So just a fluffy cloud like that. And then add a few tiny little streaks in the gaps just to add in some more elements of the kind of streaky sky. Because once you've got something like this, and the colors might look slightly different on camera to what they do, yours should be a nice orange tone. You can then go ahead and hold down on your eraser again to switch it to the same brush. So it's just artistic in the sassafras. And then we're going to set the brush size to around about 7%. And we're just going to streak our way through it using the eraser. So we're just going to create streaks through there, kind of following a little bit of the same curves that we created, but we're erasing, leaving lots of tiny little bits of residue. So for example, you can always bring your opacity down to 55%, let's say, and streak through so that you leave a little bit of that color, but you're just streaking through, breaking that up, creating a really nice streaky sky. Now, of course, we want to abide by the same curves that we were creating before. So we want that kind of bowed shape in the middle to it. And all of these ones that we created at the top, don't be afraid to also erase through them, leaving tiny little areas of residue up there. I always call it residue because it's just what's left over. It's like you streak through it and then you're left with just like a little cutaway. Now we do have more colors to introduce here. So for a minute, this might not be the final shape as such. You can then go to your colors and grab the middle of that third column from the right. Let's go back to our brush, again, making sure it's still the same brush, but we want to add in a little bit of color, making sure that the light source over on the right hand side is playing a part. Now I'm going to bring the opacity back up to 100%. I'm going to bring the size down to the 11% marker. And I'm just going to, towards my clouds, just add in like patches of lighting over onto the right hand side of some of these areas. So it's very subtle to start with. And again, your colors might look slightly different on camera. I'm just going to wiggle some color along, tapping away occasionally, a couple of taps. We don't want to overcomplicate the clouds. We just want to keep them fairly simple. So we're just adding in tap, little streaks, little sort of blotches. As long as you add them to sort of the right hand side of the cloud, you're all good. And then switch your color. Go to the lightest tone at the bottom of that third column from the right and just repeat by adding in additional highlight on the edges of some of those clouds that you just created. So a couple of dashes, a couple of squiggles, a couple of little wobbles here and there, especially over on that one over there. Try and vary your clouds though. Don't make them all too much like sort of in a similar style. Try and have a few that have a little amount of color and then a couple that have a lot more. You know, that one's really white here and I'm just going to run in a little bit of color through there as well. Whereas this one on the right's got a real naked kind of look to it. And you just wiggle your pen around it. So try and keep it simple, but something like this is what we're aiming for. Let's then move on and tackle the layer in front. So we've got our sky group done. If you're done with it and you're concerned about layers, just simply tap on the group and flatten it. Otherwise you can use this arrow here just to make your layers look a little bit tidier and you've got them saved in a group ready to go. We've got another new layer, of course, which is this area of land. I'm going to create a new layer and tap on it and clipping mask it. And I'm also going to swipe from left to right on both. I'm going to group them together and I'm just going to call it BG Hills. So BG for background, BG Hills. And on the empty layer here, out of the two, I'm going to go ahead and go to my colors. I need to switch my palette back to Autumn 1. So I'm going to go back into Autumn 1. And in the disk, we want to go ahead and grab this color here, top of the second column from the right. Same brush as we were just working with, Sassafras, but we're going to keep the opacity to 65% and again the size back to 11%. And all we're going to do is just very lightly just try and create some accent lines on our mountain hills in the background. Your pressure wants to be really subtle here, creating some sort of swooping styling to your mountain area here. So just swooping lines down towards the bottom right will do the trick. Now I don't want you to add in anything towards this area here. It's going to somewhat get hidden. I don't want you to waste your own time when we've got lots of other bits to be doing. So I'm just going to sort of add in a few streaks in here. And again, because it's on a separate layer, I could revert back to the eraser with the same brush and kind of chop away through here, just making sure that I create kind of less big blotchy patches, but a little bit of a streaky nature just to match up to the rest of it. And you can always chop away right at the very end there as well, just to kind of frame things off to the right hand side. And because it's on a separate layer, you do have the option to also tap on it and bring its opacity down if you've pressed it a little bit too firm. Let's then go ahead and move forward a layer. So we've got the red hills here. Now, before we actually carry on with the actual red hill, I want to create a set of trees that sit in front. So I've created a new layer by hitting the plus, of course. I'm going to my colors, and again, I'm switching it back to Autumn number 2. Now I'm going to grab this color here. It is the top. So if I go back into the disk, or the actual palette, it's the top here of the 4th column. Now we're going to go ahead and make sure our brush is 11% on the size again and 65 on the opacity. And what we could do is also tap on this layer and use the option of the drawing assist. So what that's going to do is when you tap on the layer and you tap on drawing assist, you'll have a little tick beside it. It's now going to use the grid system that we put in play, meaning you can only draw horizontally or vertically. This is ideal because all I want to do is just throw my pen up like this and allow multiple streaks to layer on top of each other to create a very simple kind of forest-like layer. So a little bit of a blurry set of trees a little bit further back, and you can do multiple streaks in there. You can lower your opacity. The only thing I urge you to do is just towards the base down here, make sure you kind of fill in the bit that hides on this hillside. So we can go along here, just flicking our pen up, gradually getting smaller. And as I mentioned, just gradually getting smaller as we go down here, just trying to make sure that the forest starts to disappear in behind. And you can make a couple of really large ones here as well if you want to just make it a bit more rogue and a bit larger in size. Just throwing up the size of these kind of points. And you're looking to let your pressure get really light on the end, just so that you can have that kind of tapered end and allow your forest to have some pointy trees to it almost. And then a few up here, just a little bit in behind there, just to maybe show that, say, the trees then raise up again, and they're not just making their way down towards the water's edge, they raise up. As I mentioned, don't be afraid to bring the brush size down as well to like a 3% and get in there and just create some streaks. Now, when you do make this brush smaller, notice how there tends to be a little bit more of a gap in between certain elements. So you may get like a little bit more of a patching style look to it rather than a sort of straight line almost. So I'm just getting in there now with some quite purposeful sort of streaks upwards, especially in the darkest shadow areas, just to try and bolster out maybe a little bit of a tree trunk or something like that. Now we do have multiple colors to add to this area. So if you want to, you could create a separate layer, tap on it and clipping mask it. We'll go ahead and swipe from left to right on both of them and we'll group them together, and we'll just rename the group and we'll call it tree line. And then we'll go to the empty layer that we just created, the clipped one, and go to our colors. We'll go ahead and I'm going to jump over the middle one here. I'm going to jump right to the bottom of the fourth column. And the size can be around about, say, 7% with the brush size. I'm just going to streak in some varying tones in here. So some of them you'll see are quite light now, and we can always jump back to our original base color. And maybe towards the tops of the trees, you want to focus a bit more of the lighter tone. You can even come down because we're clipped. We can't do anything else. We can only come down, and we can just add some brighter tone onto the very top edge of some of our trees. Just a little bit, just to vary up the forest kind of look to it, the lighting that's happening in the forest. And again, we'll jump to the top now of the fifth column there, and we'll add in some more. So just a couple of really light ones now, because this brush is starting to get quite bright now. So we want to keep the trees to a minimum, a little something like that. And we do have this color here, the middle of the fifth column. And we'll introduce some more. Now I'm going to set the brush size back to about 11% and shoot up somewhat in the middle area, not so much towards the top, and just a few more random tones in there before switching back to our base color, which is going to be the top again of the fourth column, and getting back in there and running some dark lines over the top and through some of those grays. So it pushes the gray tones a little bit further back. And I do this quite often. I'll start with a base shape and a base color, and then I'll add loads of color to it, and then we'll go back to our original base color, i.e. the dark tone here, just to add in some additional shadows again, because sometimes it's really easy to overdo your application of your highlights. Let's then move to the hillside in behind. So if we go to our layers, we can collapse the tree line group down. We've got the red layer there. We'll create a new layer, we'll tap on it and we'll clipping mask it, and of course swipe from left to right on both and group them together, and we'll rename this and we'll just call it hill. Now, the empty layer here, we want to go ahead and go to our colors. We're going to switch it back to autumn number 1 palette. So we'll go back into autumn number 1 and go back to the disk view. And then in here, we're going to grab this color here, bottom of the third column from the right, and same brush. So same opacity, same size. So 65 or 64 and 11% on the size. And we're just going to go ahead and accent and brighten up the top edge here of our hillside, just adding in some variety, allowing the red tone to kind of sink in behind our little tree line there, but make sure you leave little gaps, little areas of the red to poke through, such as here. And then we've got one more brighter tone, which is the middle of the third column from the right, and you want to go over the top basically of where you've just added in that other tone, adding in some variety to the landscape, some grooves, because if you leave shadows in there, like the base color, it acts as shadows. So you can really sort of detail a hillside without having to do too much to it necessarily. Now, this next part is we're going to add some sort of tree-like sort of shapes in the back. And I say tree-like because they're going to be very sort of abstract and very loose, because they are going to act as kind of filler further back. So we're just going to go ahead, and we've got our hills group here. We're going to create a new layer, but we want to drag it underneath the hill. So we want to put it here. So before BG Hills and the red hill that we just created, we want to go ahead and we'll create another one and start from left to right, and we'll group them together just so things are nice and organized as always, and we'll just call this trees. Now we do need 3 layers in this group, so I'm going to go ahead and tap on an empty layer and create another one. So we've got 3 in this group. The bottom layer out of the 3, we're going to go to our colors. We're going to grab this color here. It is the top of the 6th column there. And your brush wants to be set now to airbrushing and the soft brush. I'm going to set the size to around about, say, 17%. And I'm going to go behind here with a bit of red. And that's just going to sort of trickle off down here really, really lightly with a little bit of red. Now, what I'm going to kind of do here is, again, we're going to add in like filler content that's a little bit further back, so we don't have to over detail this part. Now, I'm going to go ahead and switch the brush color now to the middle of the fourth column from the right. I'm going to bring this size down to about 8%, just towards the top end of there. A couple of rounded sort of orange, very light patches here, because we're going to somewhat try and simulate that there's more trees back there. And then just go ahead and grab your color again and grab this color here, the middle of the third column now from the right. Bring the size down again, about 5% now. I'm just lightly adding in taps of this color here just to show random, almost like blurry light shapes in the distance. Now on this layer, we're going to go ahead and go to our brush. So first of all, let's go to our brush. Let's change it to the option of artistic again in sassafras. We're going to keep the same settings we had before, but now we're going to add in sort of very random, almost like shapes here. So we're going to grab the middle color here in the fourth column from the right. And then when we get over to here, all I want you to do is create curly, random flicks, almost as if the concept is, imagine that there's a tree here, obviously a actual main trunk. We're trying to just show sort of this area here where we just create fluffy kind of shapes. So we're trying to just accent almost that there's like an illusion that there's some sort of trees here. So creating sort of rounded shapes, somewhat leaning off to the right, will look really effective. You can leave gaps in there, get really messy. You can even bring the brush size, down to around about 6% for these ones a little bit further back here, and create kind of curls and flicks to, again, simulate areas of tree. And we're going to draw some more detailed ones in front. So these ones aren't going to be fully visible. It's just background filler content as if to show that there is a forest of some sort making its way a bit further back. Let's then switch to color, because it just needs to be as simple as that. Switch the color then to the top color in the fourth column from the right, and go over the top of your oranges here and just add in like little random patches there to show additional bits of tone and color in there. So it's a bit messy. It's meant to be a messy part of the video, really, so don't stress over it. I really urge you not to stress, because it's going to get covered up with other content. Right now it's just there to give the nod that there's a little bit of a tree pointing its head out potentially. That's all it needs to be. Now let's go ahead and put some content in front of it. Let's cover up this mess. So let's go to the layer above. We're going to go to our colors. We're going to grab this color here, top of the sixth column there. Your brush wants to be changed to the option of textures and the signet brush. So textures and signet. We'll set the size to, let's go to about 5% to start with. And then we're going to make our way over to here. We're going to use this brush in this kind of circular fashion, because it's got this kind of texture that somewhat simulates a bit of a tree almost. And we are just going to create rounded kind of tree-like shapes again here, just rounded patches of tree. Let's leave a gap and then put another one kind of here, bit rounded shape. You can even bring the brush size down. Let's bring it down to say a 3% in here and create rounded shape here in the tree. So rounded fluffy shapes, a little bit lower. And then just in here, I'm just going to sort of do a smaller brush size just around the edges there, just to try and make sure it's not too blobby almost. And that's how we've also covered up a little bit of that kind of mess that we created in behind as well. We then go to our colors. We're going to grab the middle of the sixth column and we're going to add some color to that. So we're just going to, I'm going to tap and get rid of that marker, because I want to have it was a 5% before. I'm going to make it a 4%. And then towards the top right of any of these kind of blobs, you want to think about what are the areas that are part of a tree that you think are going to face over to the right hand side where our light source is going to be. So I've got a blob here. I've accented this area here, as you can see, which now tells me that that is the edge of the tree. There's a larger tree in behind. That's why there's a bit of red there. There's a larger tree in behind there too. If I put a big sort of rounded blob like this, that kind of tells me that that's a rounded shape of a tree. So I could do that again, but with a little bit more purpose, adding in little areas just to the woods, the right hand side of any kind of blob shapes that you created to just accent the right area, which hopefully is the area that's getting some lighting. Then we'll go to our colors. We will grab the bottom of the sixth column. I'll bring the brush size ever so slightly further down to a 3% now. I'm going to tap on those tree-like shapes that we created on top of the reds. So we've laid the blueprint with the previous red. You're now layering on top of that with some orange tone this time. And you can see if I keep adding it a little bit more towards the right-hand side every single time, I've got the 3 tones here, dark, red, and the orange. And now I've got tree shapes starting to come to life a little bit with different colors and hues. And you can just tap away, leave and sacrifice certain areas. I've sacrificed this area here, meaning I'm not going to add any more color to it. If I go to my colors and I go ahead and move into another tone, which I'm going to jump to the top now of the 7th column here, so 4th column from the right. I'm going to zoom in over here, same sort of brush size really, and then I'm going to accent it with a little bit more yellow in here, more autumnal yellow, beautiful tones in there, and then a couple patches in there. I'm going to sacrifice certain trees, not add the yellow absolutely everywhere, just certain areas we'll add the yellow to, varying it up just a tiny bit. And then what we'll do is we'll go ahead and go to our layers and we'll go to the empty layer in this group now. If we go to our color and we go ahead and grab this color here, top of the 2nd column there, let's go to our brush and change it to a different one now. We're going to go to inking in the syrup brush, and I've got the size set to 9%. We're going to create some tree trunks. So starting off down here, we're just going to create a tree trunk and allow it to kind of come across, and then maybe it sticks its head out again a little bit there. You can make your way back up the tree trunk and create large areas that just make their way up towards the very top of that tree, little branches that have little gaps in between. And now all of those fluffy shapes look like they all attach to one main structure, which of course is this tree trunk. I'm keeping it simple. It's somewhat background content anyway. It doesn't need to be kind of over complicated, but you can create really interesting tree-like shapes. You can have, again, branches come back through if you want to towards the top ends, you know, like a really thin one there. And just keep going until you think that all of your sort of your blobs of your sort of shapes of your tree tops there have been nicely connected. So you've got enough tree trunks basically to kind of support the large sort of shapes that you created a little bit higher. So do another one there, and then maybe another one just down here, keeping the brush quite thin if I can manage it. Now, that's a little bit of background content. Now, at the minute, these trees are actually in the same color spectrum as the trees we're going to add at the front. So these actually need toning down. So what we're going to go ahead and do is, once you're happy, for instance, the layer in behind, where we've got the kind of gradient, I'm going to go back to my color. So I'm on the bottom layer out the 3. I'm going to go to my colors and grab this tone here, the middle of the 3rd column from the right. If I go back to my brushing, airbrushing and soft brush, I just need to separate a little bit of these reds by introducing a little bit of random sort of light tone towards the bottom, just a tiny bit like so. Then when you're happy, go to your layers and pinch the tree layers together. So pinch them together. Then go to your adjustments and go to hue, saturation and brightness. Now when things get further back, they typically lose a lot of saturation. And also they tend to get a little bit brighter. So we can bring these numbers around to around about sort of this point here. Don't want to lose the saturation too much, but we do need to tone them down a little bit. So I'm going to go 45 and I'm going to go to 53 there, just brightening them up. That's all we need to do. And you can always tap and then get the option of preview and see the difference by holding this middle button here in there. And that just shows you the slight color change. Tap on your adjustments when you're done. Let's now work on a piece of land. So let's work over here on the right hand side. So let's go to our layers and collapse that group down. We've got the land over on the right. Of course, we'll create a new layer. We'll tap on it, we'll clipping mask it to the empty layer, and we'll swipe from left to right, grouping them together. And we'll just call this right land. Right land. And then we'll go to the clipped layer that we've got. We're going to go to our colors and we're going to go ahead and let's grab straight away this color here, bottom of the 2nd column there. We're going to make sure our brush is set back to the option of artistic and sassafras. And then we're going to make sure the size is set to around about 7%, same opacity that we had before. And now I want you to kind of replicate what you did back here. We're going to create some swooping lines. I'll make the brush size back up to 11. And then I'm going to go ahead and go down the surface. I'm really light to start with because I want to plan it out. One thing I don't want to do is go right to the edge down here. We want to preserve that area and reserve it for adding in some stone-like shapes down there. So I'm going to go ahead and introduce some green land running down really light if you can manage it with your pressure on the screen, swooping it down, layering it on top. Every time you go over the top of yourself, you're adding in more color. You can also sort of brighten up certain areas. Maybe we want to press really firm in this area here, adding in a lovely green spot here, and that goes all the way beyond where we can see anyway, all the way off. And notice how I've left the shoreline as well. You can then go to your colors and grab the bottom of the third column. And of course, this is a really bright yellow now. So we want to be very careful with adding this in. We're streaking through the green, identifying areas that we want to show as a little bit brighter. And by all means, really go for an area if you think that that's where the sun for you, or is going to sort of brighten up. I think that looks really cool like that. We've got nice sort of dark tones in there to separate the land, so we can roll with that. And as I mentioned, we've got the shoreline. So let's go to our colors. We're going to grab this color here, bottom of the first column. And then all I want you to do is zoom in and just flick up from the sort of shoreline area. And you can just flick up towards the grass. Leave gaps in between. You want that kind of streaky nature to it. And by the end, this will all look like rocks just making their way down in towards the sort of water. So we've got a really rocky, stony edge to our water. As you get further back, you don't need to add in quite so many, if I'm honest. You can keep it really light with your pressure, and a few of those details maybe fall off. You can keep going if you want to though, but you should end up with something like this where you've got just enough information to just look at that and go, those rocks slope down towards the water's edge. That must mean that that sort of grass there stops and then it runs into that sort of stony texture instead. Now notice how you can also go ahead and just add in a little bit up here if you want to, just to kind of blend the two environments together. It's got to be really subtle though, really subtle. But those lines there should give you enough texture that you can see how it runs down and into the water. And that area of land is done. We can actually move completely on from that now. So let's go ahead and collapse that down. Let's go ahead and go to our left piece of land over here. We'll go ahead and we will create a new layer in front of it. We'll tap on it and clipping mask it. We'll swipe from left to right and we'll group them together and we'll call it left land. And this group here. We're going to repeat a lot of the steps, but we've got more detail to add in here. So on this empty layer that we have got clipped, we're going to go to our colors. We're going to go ahead and grab the top color first of all in the second column. Now this area now might be very subtle to see, but we're just trying to add in some brown tones in here. So I'm just rotating my canvas. I might even make the brush a little bit bigger, up to about 20%. I'm trying to just show the land and the graduation of it. We're swooping down from the top almost down here, down to sort of a path, because we're going to have, if I change my color to white very quickly, we're going to have a path kind of come round our land like this. So we want to show how the land flows down towards that path, and then we can go ahead and actually detail it further. So I'm just swooping down, adding in a bit of brown then on the remaining piece of kind of grass over here. Again, we want to leave that shoreline. So we're going to go along here, bit of brown along there, and then bring that brown down here. Again, probably very subtle to see on camera, but I want you just to create the little bit of brown in there, so it's not just on a black shape, it's got a little bit more texture and color underneath. Let's go ahead then and add in some more color. Now we can go ahead and create a new layer, tap on it and clipping mask it in just to keep them all separated. We're going to go ahead and add in the middle color in the second column, and we want to go ahead and add that on top of those browns. So let's go back down to 11%, just trying to keep it a bit smaller and a bit more in control. And we're going to go along that banking over here on the right hand side, just like so. And then again, a couple of swoops in from here will look great. Just a couple of swoops down on top, leave areas. You could even go back up again a little bit, up to say 18%, and just create swoops down, leaving shadowed areas. So all I'm trying to do is just sort of beat it into you a little bit, like here, and here, leaving gaps to show the base color underneath, because that will ultimately be our shadow tone. And you can just streak in some areas here, adding in some color, blending that round, blending that a little bit towards where our path is going to be. And then we're going to get into some green tone. So we've got the bottom now of the second column. This is where we're going to introduce the greens, obviously on top. So we're going to go all the way on top curving it down towards, again, where our path is going to be. This is going to be a luscious piece of green land. But again, if there's a gap, I want those tones to come through. I want those dark tones to come through. I want those brown tones to come through. And I'm just streaking down, adding in the color, following the same principle. I'm going to wrap the green round a little bit on the top edge to kind of show that the path maybe wraps round. Add in a bit of green here too, a little bit along there. Let's add in a little bit here. Now, down in this bottom left corner, we want to kind of leave it a little bit darker. So I'm not going to add in too much green down here. I always typically like the kind of foreground area to sort of fall off a little bit in terms of its color, because we don't want to sort of have people looking at the corner of the design. We want them looking at the centerpiece, which of course is going to be our tree in a second. So we've got some greens running down there. Now we do have a really bright yellow to create, so we're going to put it on a separate layer. We're going to tap on it and clipping mask it. We're going to go to our colors and grab that yellow tone. It's more yellow than it is green, bottom of the third column. And this is where we really accent where our brightest tones are, which is going to be round here, round that edge there onto the grass. Maybe the brush size can go back down to that 11% range. Adding that in there. And then again, right up on the top edge, just like we did over there, we're going to add in some yellow tone. But because this side is ultimately facing the light source of our sort of sun, we can probably add in a little bit more of this yellow over here compared to the right hand side. Again, we've got the gaps in there, we've got the greens, leave little streaks in there. Streaks are perfect. Streaks add sort of leave areas, sort of nice and dark, little divots. You can run a little bit of color on there and just sort of tone them down a little bit, but this is what we're going for. A nice bright tone up here. And we can always tone it down because, of course, we've separated our layers nice and sensibly to then tone it down afterwards. Let's then add in our path. So we're going to go ahead and go to our layers. We're going to create a separate layer for the path and create a new layer and clipping mask it. We'll go to our colors. The path itself is going to sort of be a combination of a few of these tones up here. So we're going to grab this color here. It is the top of the, that's the top of the fourth column, and our path is going to run down here. So we want to pen that in. We want to go horizontally in that gap. We are above the green layers, so we can really now define our path again if we feel like we've lost it a little bit too much. And again, as it makes its way over towards the closest area towards us, of course we want it to probably get a little bit wider, but I want it to really fade out. Don't worry, we can always fade it out later on if you wanted to. Right now, we're just going to focus on adding in that kind of dirt path through here along our banking. Now potentially I've got too much. I could go to my eraser and grab the sassafras again as the eraser and just kind of erase the edge, bringing that green back into play and narrowing it up a little bit in the distance, because of course as it gets further away we want it to kind of fall off a little bit in terms of its color and brightness. Let's go to our colors. Let's grab then the middle color in the fourth column. Back to your paintbrush, of course. And let's go ahead and add in some bright tones. Now the bright tones you want to kind of streak horizontally through your path, leaving gaps, leaving streaks, leaving little bumps and lumps in the dirt that we've created. And it shows texture, it shows like the unevenness of this just sort of mud path really that's just been worn down as people have walked over the top of it. There we go. So it's starting to get a little bit more texture. Notice how I leave the right hand side and the left hand side with the original color. So I'm only adding in the brighter tone towards the middle. Let's then go to our colors again. We've got another brighter tone. It is the bottom of the fourth column. We get back in that same path and we just go left to right in the center. You could probably bring the brush size down, maybe down to about 5%, and just add in a little bit more brightness in certain areas at random, to be honest with you, just at random little lighter patches in there, little scuffs, little bits of brightness in our path. But as always, the best thing to then do is go back to your base color, which we're going to go ahead and we're going to grab the top of the second column, and we're going to get back in there and add in shadows again. So I always, like I say, base color first, add in lots of highlight tones, and then get back in there and reintroduce shadows. So I want to introduce some shadows towards the edge of the path as if the grass is slightly higher and raised above, and then it just comes across onto the path as a bit of a shadow. And you can do that on both sides, adding in some darker textures here. Where we've got our tree that's going to sit right here on the edge of the path, we're going to go ahead and sort of shadow with the intent of really darkening this area up here. So we're going to shadow just under here a little bit more, adding in some streaks. Bring the brush size down, bring it down to a 3% as you get really close, and just add in random little sort of bumps and lumps in the path. Maybe it's a bit of root that's sticking up potentially away from our sort of tree, making its way onto the dirt path. We can just keep, you could literally detail this all day long. I had a Hillside tutorial that I did on Patreon, and that had a really long detailed path, because sometimes you can just spend so much time just trying to bring out new details and whatnot, and little areas such as bumps, as I mentioned, and rocks and divots, etc. But always zoom out, don't get lost in it. Make sure you zoom all the way out. And then what we can also do is we could go ahead and go to the same layer but change our color to one of the green tones, say the bottom of the second column. Make that brush size back up to about 7 or 8%, and just make sure that we overlap the path or get very close to it with the original green tone now. So you can add in a bit more green towards the edge of the path, kind of defining its shape a bit more. We're on the same layer as the path, so what we draw in now really does get us right up close to some of those details, banking it down a little bit more, adding in some green over the top, and we can switch it to the light tone as well, of course. But just making sure we bring the grass to the path, and then go to our colors and grab the yellow. That's the bottom of the third column, and just bring in that brighter tone just on top, maybe really lightly along there, a little bit along this edge as well, making sure you just blend the two environments together, i.e. the grass and the path area, like so. Let's then go ahead and go to our layers. Let's create another new layer, tap on it and clipping mask it. Let's go to our colors again and grab the bottom of the first column. Brush size back up to 11%. Again, do the same rocky trick down here. You just do the vertical lines, so we're leaning them slightly backwards now, off to the left edge. So just a couple of really faint lines in here. If you do multiple lines, it will look really good. Leave shadow areas as well if you can, to show like there's differences in the rocks. Some are pointing right at it, at the light source, and some are pointing away, leaving gaps, getting right up close. Don't go right up close to the path necessarily, unless you want your path to run right beside the water's edge. Maybe there's a little bit of a banking over there, but you know, closer towards us over here, maybe the rocks do get fairly close to the path. For example, I could run mine right up towards the edge there, and then you kind of just have a little bit sticking out. You can make all these things as you go. Sometimes I don't even plan that kind of concept ahead of time. You just see how the shapes work out, how it flows, and see what makes sense to you. Let's go ahead and add in our main tree down here. So we're going to go to our layers. We're going to go in front of our left land and create a new layer. We're going to go to our colors, and we're going to grab the color in the top of the fifth column. Your brush wants to be set to the option of inking and the syrup brush. Maximum opacity, 9% brush size pretty much. And we're going to draw in our tree. Now see this first column here of our design, of our grid. That is pretty much going to be our guide for where our tree is going to run. So I'm going to go ahead and sort of create like a bit of a swooping line up here. And then I'm going to sort of make my way up with the intent of somewhat starting to lean it slightly over to the right hand side. So you can see it crossed over the line now, leaning into here. And then what you can do is kind of just draw in your main kind of line all the way up towards the top. Then we can go ahead and draw in the other side of the tree down here. So you could create something with quite a large root line there as it gets its way further up. Let's go ahead then and split it off here. Let's split that off, getting thinner as you go all the way to the very top. And then of course, we just need to link that together. So we can go ahead and draw in some kind of root lines down here in the ground. Don't overcomplicate this, if I'm honest, just keep it fairly simple. Little something like that for shape. And then at the top, just go ahead then and let's run up from the right side to the left side, connecting them together so that we've got a space in here that we can drag and drop the color into. That's then your basic sort of shape that you can build your branches off of. So we can go ahead and draw across here with the intent of drawing across some of these trees in behind. So we can draw in a tree branch here and make this one fairly low. Now we're going to add in, of course, the greenery. It's more going to be the autumnal colors, isn't it? So we're going to add in all the leaves in a second. So at the minute you're just planning out your tree, and it's quite important to really nail this down, because if this is visible, you're going to go ahead and see a lot of this. So you can cross over branches, you can allow branches to really sort of get quite detailed, but it's totally up to you how much time you want to spend on it. You don't need to spend a great deal, to be honest, but a good density of branches will look really, really cool and have some sort of go in different directions. It's really sort of interesting to see how brave people can be with this. Being brave will give you a really good looking tree. Your tree also, you can run up and down it if you want to add in kind of new bumps and lumps along the shape of it, so it's not too straight, not too perfect. Don't do too much as you make your way up there, but do add a little bit in there. And then you can add in like a more prominent tree branch here, for example. This one's a bit chunkier, and then it runs across again some of those other branches, which tells your eye, is this either potentially closer to us because it's bigger, or is it just generally bigger in size? But it also now seems to push this one a little bit further back because this one's chunkier. It kind of tells your eye, well, that must be closer. So you can do little tricks like that to kind of really pull off an interesting tree shape, and also the varying main sort of channels here for your branches to run off of really do add so much variety and realism almost. By having different branch sizes, you can really make it look quite convincing. Let's then run up here, probably bolding this out a little bit more as it makes its way up towards the top. And then I'm probably going to try and split it off again. Adding in another one along there. And then let's add in another one along here too, branching them out quite literally, obviously, and making sure we add some fun details. Now, some of these are going to get covered up by the leaves that we add in a moment. So what you can do in a second is reintroduce some of these branch lines in the latter stage of this part. So make sure you spend some time detailing your tree though, before you make your way over towards adding in all of the leaves that are going to sit on here. I don't typically skip ahead in my tutorials because there's certain things such as that one there that are things that should be pointed out as they sort of come across my mind as we're going through these types of things together. And so I don't typically skip ahead, only if things are extremely boring and I've not really got anything to fill the dead air with. But just one thing that you can fill the dead air with today, Joel, is if you want to, you can join us, me and James Julia. We have a weekly show here on YouTube. It's called The Sketch Wave, and we talk all things Procreate, digital art, all sorts of other things as well. So make sure to come and check out The Sketch Wave on YouTube. It's just like a podcast style show that we have together. And James Julia, if you didn't already know, you must already know, obviously one of the biggest names in the Procreate space. So again, that is The Sketch Wave here on YouTube. Make sure to check that out. We have great fun talking about different topics every single week. And there's so many things we've got planned as well to introduce to the show. So if you also have any ideas as well, or any questions you'd like us to answer, please feel free to message us over there. So my tree's looking pretty good. I'm pretty happy with how that looks. We've got lots of the different levels and density to the branches. Now what we're going to do is we're going to go ahead and go to the base of the tree here, and we're just going to go ahead and tap on our layer. We're going to add a mask to it, and I'm just going to make sure I'm on the mask and my color is set to black. My brush is set to airbrushing in the soft brush, and all I'm going to do is just set the soft airbrush down to about 1 or 2% and just fade out the bottom of the tree here, wiggling it down, trying to get rid of a little bit of that solid line and just fading it out the tiniest bit in certain areas, just to make sure it runs into the ground a bit more seamless. And while we're also here, before we get into detailing the tree, let's go ahead and go back into the left land. This is why we've not collapsed it down yet. We'll create a new layer and tap on it and clipping mask it. We'll go to our colors, and we're going to go ahead and go to let's go to the top of the first column. Your brush then can be the option of what we had before, artistic and sassafras. And we're just going to add in a bit of a shadow in behind here. So you can now sort of connect the tree to the land. You can add in a bit of a very light shadow running off here. You can darken up quite a bit behind here really, but a bit of a leaning shadow off towards this left hand side will look great. So you can build that in. You can get rid of a little bit of your tree shape, just a bit of a subtle area of darkness just leaning over here where that tree just really gets in the way of the brightness of our sun. Lovely. Let's then go ahead and go to our tree again. We're going to add the leaves first. So we're going to create a new layer. We're going to go ahead and let's swipe from left to right on the tree, the mask and the new layer and group them together. And we'll just call this subject because it is our main subject. So subject. We'll go to the empty layer in this group, so the top there. We're going to go to our brush. We're going to change it to organic. And in there, we're going to use a brush that James is using currently, which is the rainforest brush. But we're going to swipe it to the left and reset it, so it's back to normal. And then we're going to tap on the rainforest. We're going to tap on it. And we're going to go ahead and set the spacing to around about 45 to 47%, somewhere in there. Then hit done. We're then going to go to our colors. We're going to grab the top of the 6th column there. And we're going to set the brush size to around about, let's take a look at that, way too big at the minute. Let's set that a lot smaller. We want to go down to around about 4 to 3%. So 4 or 3% will look great. And we're going to flush out our tree. So you want to look for where you've added your branches, of course. Keep your canvas horizontal though, because if you rotate it, notice how the brush's head are now going to start pointing downwards. So keep your canvas quite horizontal if you can. And let's make the brush size a bit smaller, about 3%. And we just want to add in patches of this beautiful red tone in here, leaving some gaps if you can. You can dense out some areas here and there. And this is going to take a little bit of time just to fill this in. And you can obviously leave gaps if you really want to make it look quite weathered, or if it's early autumn, or in your mind you don't think that the tree would wilt too much, because we never normally sort of go with the concept that it's a particular type of tree. It's more just the concept of what a tree is. You don't have to think actually it's the particular species of tree, for example, and therefore it wouldn't wilt this time of year in the, all the specifics. I don't ever plan out a design like that. I draw trees, etc., bushes, etc., that I think will just look good and add to the piece. So I'm adding in some more up here, and I want to make sure I go right the way up to the edge of the canvas. You can see right now I'm quite heavily packing it in, because I imagine that the very top up here probably going to have a bit more of a sort of head to it, a bit more of a larger volume potentially right at the very top. And I don't want to leave my tree looking too sort of scarce in here. So I'm going to go ahead and pick this particular one here to be my little sort of subject here, to add in a little bit more across the tree, just so that I can overlap the base of the tree a bit more. But leaving gaps will look absolutely great. Like when you can leave gaps in trees and see the sky through it, that's what makes it look a bit more believable. So apologies if the camera is also wobbling a little bit. Let's add in a few more just on the edges, just to kind of add a bit more randomness and less solid shaping to a little bit of these tree leaves here. There we go, we've got a nice shape to it. Let's then go to our colors. We're going to move through all these tones up to this yellow here. So we're grabbing now the middle of the 6th column there. And we're going to add in some red tones. Now it's up to you. You could alpha lock the layer if you're happy with the coverage. At this point, you just need to make the decision. So what I'm saying there is, just to give it some more context, if you keep adding more and more and more of this rainforest brush with different colors every single time, you're slowly going to actually make it thicker, very, very thick, in fact, with new color. You're going to make it very thick and dense. And if you want that kind of autumnal look to it, then you may want to alpha lock it, meaning you could only paint on the leaves that you've already painted in. That would then mean that you would be able to only leave it at a certain level of density. Now, notice how I'm also adding in a bit more red on these rear ones, because I want those ones to be primarily red and these ones over here to be a bit more yellow. I'm also leaving big gaps like here. Leaving gaps with leaves and again sacrificing them almost to the shadows looks so good, but you've got to be brave with it. You've got to be able to just leave a gap. Sometimes our mind says to just cover everything as much as we can, but we don't. We want to leave gaps. Now this red tone somewhat is also going to act as a bit of a shadow tone anyway, so we can go ahead and use both of these last two tones. Now at this point you could then tap on the layer. You can go ahead and alpha lock it, so you don't add any more density to it. I'm happy with the density. I'm then going to go to my colors. I'm going to grab the bottom now of the 6th column there. I might even make the brush a tiny bit smaller, so I'm down to about 2% now. Light source is over on the right, so I'm imagining that we add some a bit brighter towards the right side. But again, the left-hand side of the tree over here, I don't want to add in too much back here. I want this to have a little bit of a darker look to it, maybe even all the way up here too. So maybe I'll just focus these new bright tones over here on the right-hand side, just kind of wiggling them in. You can focus on some of those edges if you want, that's got the rainforest brush there. So for example, these little stray ones over here, rather than them be nice and dark, you want them to be nice and light because you're showing how the light is hitting the edge of all of these leaves. Again, all credit to James for this one. We talk about our latest tutorials in the sketch wave all the time. So he's mentioned the rainforest so many times. I thought, you know what, it's my turn to give it a go this time. So I've introduced it in this one here today. Sacrificing this area up here with the odd little bit of color. Then we'll go to our colors again. We're going to go ahead and I'm going to jump to the, I think we can jump all the way to the top now of the 7th column. And we can go ahead and introduce some yellow tones in here. Again, where do you want to focus them? And just because this is a shadow side doesn't mean they won't get the odd speckle, obviously, of like more wilted leaves. So you can definitely tap in there to add in some wilted leaves. But if you want to sort of show brightness, then you want to add it just on the right hand side. I'm going to make sure that this area of the tree has some really good yellow tone to it. And we can always go back to our previous color, the previous base color, the darkest tone, if you really want to reintroduce some more shadows in your tree. There we go, a couple of specks of yellow. Let's go to our colors again. Let's move across to the top of the 3rd column from the right. Add in some brightest of the yellow tones again. I'm going to just focus this a little bit more on the edge because I'm fairly happy with the application of all the color. So just a little bit on the edges over here, brightening them up, kind of showing all the bunches of the tree, if that makes sense, like this bunch, just adding in a little accent of yellow, maybe a little accent of yellow here too, in there. And we've got some lovely variety in that tree. Now at this point you can make a decision. If you've gone ahead and made yours a bit like mine, where it's a little bit sort of transparent, you can go to the layer and swipe it to the left and duplicate it. And watch when I hit duplicate, it thickens right up. You get a really thick, dense amount of leaves. Now it's up to you. That's simply just opacity. You can tap on this layer and bring the opacity down. That's what it was before. And then you can just find a sort of happy medium in there, maybe even just around about 50%. And then you can pinch the two of them together to create a little bit more of a denser tree in terms of its opacity anyway. And then therefore you can't see some of the branches through. And that is exactly why we detailed it before, making sure you can see all of your branches because some of them poke through there. Let's then go ahead and go down to the tree then and create a new layer and tap on it and clipping mask it. We're going to go to our colors. We're going to grab the middle color in the 5th column there. And we're going to go back to our brush, artistic, sassafras, size. Let's bring that down to about sort of 6%. Let's run this color down the tree, like so. On the right hand side, you can go round towards the left hand side as well though, but just very, very lightly if you can with your pressure. Running that down along this root here, for example, that I saw, and maybe even reimagining that there's a root here at the front, some sort of detailing that you think you want to pull out. And then a little bit of lighting along some of these branches, just giving them, of course, that wood-like color rather than them be too dark. And it will also help them kind of blend in with the trees. So the ones up here, for example, where they run all the way through into the trees, I'm not too worried about sort of sitting there and detailing them up too much. I'm adding the color towards the top end of this one, and I'm probably going to erase from that in a second. In fact, while I'm here, I'll show you. If I go to my eraser, we just erase from here because the tree trunk, I imagine, would get in the way and the lighting wouldn't stretch down there. So I'm just going to take that away a little bit, go back to my brush and make my way back up the tree. Let's go back up along some of the branches, the main channels, the main avenues that you created in your tree, up towards the very top, along some of those. And the brush should allow you to sort of have a few areas that are a little bit kind of messy. And that's what we want. We want a little bit of texture in there in your tree. By all means, just run it randomly through the tips of all of your branches up there, just to tone them down as well a little bit, push them into the tree, fade them out a little bit so they're not quite so dark. You don't need to see all of them. Then go to your colors and grab the bottom of the same column, so the bottom of the 5th column, and we'll zoom in and we'll add in a little bit of texture and color down the edge here of brightness of the edge of your tree underneath some of the branches that you think could get a little bit more lighting to show the light source coming across. That's probably quite a low hanging light source based on what I've drawn in, so I probably can rectify that a little bit. I'll make my way up the tree into some of these areas here, Just adding in brightness just a little bit in certain areas that I think actually, yeah, maybe the light does cast through there. Maybe it does cast onto the back of this branch. You know, we don't want to have a tree that's super dark, but we also want to, you know, have some nice contrast to play with. It is also a painting, so you can really have fun with it and make up your own world. While we're working on the tree, let's go ahead and add in some leaves falling and leaves on the ground. So we can go to our layers. Let's create a new one in the subject group right at the top. We'll go to our colors and grab the top of the 6th column. We're going to set the brush size to around about say 3%, but I'm going to bring the opacity up to about 100. And I just want to try and create like little flicks. There we go. Little sort of flicks in there, and you can join them together as if they're not like just curled leaves. They're like sort of star-shaped leaves. I can't remember what type of tree that is, but a couple that are just floating across the river, across like so. Little very small ones as well, if you can, like bring the brush size down to like a 2% and add in some really small ones in there, and a couple of little sort of dashes up here just to kind of show like a few more sort of falling off maybe a little bit further back, just show how windy it maybe is in this autumnal scene. And I think I'll leave that at that. In fact, I don't think I need to add too many more. Let's maybe just add one more, just a little bit over here, because we can't control ourselves. Let's add another one just over there. And then we'll go to that layer. We'll just tap on it and we will alpha lock it so we can't paint outside of what we've already drawn on there. And we'll go to our colors. We'll grab the middle of the 4th column from the right, nice bright orange tone, and we'll get into some of those leaves, adding in some area of orange on them. You don't have to do it everywhere. And also just look, just tippity tapping, just tap, 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 random squiggles and wiggles. That's all it needs to be, nice and random across them. And then go to your colors and grab the yellow top of the 3rd column. I'll make the brush size a bit bigger again, back up to about 6%. I'll just add in some yellow on some of those, not all of them, some of them, especially this one down here, because it blends in with the background a little bit too much. So you can add in some random leaves just scattering across the air there. And then we'll go ahead and we'll go into the left-hand group, because that's where we always keep things contained. We'll create a new layer. We won't clip it though. We'll just simply go to our colors and grab the top of the 6th column there. Your brush wants to be set back to the option of organic, and we're going to go to the rainforest brush again. And then just down here, we're going to go ahead and just add in a little bit of red on the ground. Nothing too detailed, just little sort of splotches almost of red. I've just made the brush size a bit smaller there. It's down to a 1%, just so I can patch it in with a bit more kind of sort of control, really. Just patching that in the right areas. Just a few areas of red around the base will look good. And then you can get in there if you want to and change it to say the bottom of the 6th column there, and just tap away, adding in slightly larger, maybe a 2%, just tapping away there, add in some little areas of the leaves on the floor. Just keeping it simple, we don't want to overdo it. So let's go ahead and also add some content to our water as well. So we're going to go ahead and go to our layers. We're going to collapse subject down, create a new layer. We're going to drag it down. We're going to move it in front of BG Hills here. We're going to go to our colors and we're going to change it to the Autumn number 2 palette. And we're going to grab the color in the top left of the palette. Our brush wants to be set to the soft brush under airbrushing. We'll set the size to around about say 10 to 15%, and we're just going to fill in this area here for our water. We're then going to go ahead and go to our layer. We'll create a new layer and tap on it and clipping mask it, and we'll swipe from left to right, group them together. We'll call this river. And on the empty layer here, we're going to go ahead and go to our brush, go back to artistic and the sassafras. I'm never going to get that right, I'm sorry. Sassafras. We've got the brush size set to 11%, opacity set to 64. We're going to go to our colors and grab the middle now of the 1st column of Autumn number 2 palette, and just go left to right along here, along your water. And then as you start to make your way in towards sort of the main width here, we're just going to go ahead and just lightly create some streaks across the water, but making sure we go back over ourselves a few times just because we're set to a low opacity, and make sure that the water as it makes its way off towards the back end over there is a little bit more of this green tone. And you can add in some very subtle light streaks in here. Keep your pressure nice and light, and you'll be able to create some really nice wavy, I say wavy, but you know, the ripples in the water. Let's now add a reflection in here. So what we're going to do is we're going to go to our layers. We're going to create a new layer, tap on it and clipping mask it. We are going to go ahead and turn off our subject group, our left-hand land, and then everything here we can then go ahead and go to our layers. We just also need to turn off this layer here that's clipped to the river, so it was the color that we just added. And then we can go ahead and tap away. We can swipe down with 3 fingers and go to the option of copy all. We can then go ahead and make sure in our layers that we're on this empty new layer that we clipped to the river shape. And then swipe down with 3 fingers and go to paste. Then you can flip it vertically, you can move it down, and the only thing really we want to do is make sure that the edge over here is touching, make sure snapping is turned on in the bottom left to actually activate that, and then drag it down until you start to see a little bit of that red hillside and also some of the tips of the trees as well. We don't want to move it all the way down, but something a little something like that. Then tap on your cursor when you're done. Then go to the layer, tap on it and change its blend mode to soft light, and then we'll bring back in all the other layers. So we'll tap on that, we'll bring back in this layer here. We'll go ahead and bring in left land and subject, and then we're going to create a new layer, tap on it, clipping mask it. We'll go to our colors, grab the color in the bottom left of the palette. And we're going to introduce a little bit of a darker tone that just runs around the base here. So we're just going to just shadow basically in here around the base of our land and how it just maybe makes its way into the water. So you can follow a little bit of the shape that you've already got there to a degree to kind of show maybe it's got a little something happening under the water. A little streak along that area of the land just to shadow it up a little bit more, and also down here as well. Just shadow it along the base there of the land. And then we're going to go to our layers. We'll create another new layer, of course, tap on it and clipping mask it. We'll go to our colors and we're going to grab this nice light blue here at the top of the second column. And we're going to add in some lovely highlight that runs across our river. So now we're going to add in the highlight. It's going to look a bit more reflective, really pretty kind of color tone that's going to come through here. As you make your way round, maybe you want to kind of focus the lighting a bit more on the left. So I'm going to bring the brush size down to about 6%. It's going to be a little bit smaller. I'm just going to kind of wiggle my pen and create these kind of streak lines across the water almost. So the kind of ripples in the water. You can also go ahead and just lightly go around the very edge of your land. Really, really lightly. Just a little something like this in the distance anyway. There we go. And also maybe a tiny bit down the water's edge, down that side too. And some streaks across, trying to keep them a little bit horizontal and tapping if you can to create little gaps in between some of these ripples. They don't need to be straight lines all the time. We can bring the opacity back up to the marker point, which is set to 11%, and just brighten up in that gap a bit more. Lovely. Blending it out on the edges, giving it a bit more of a nice teal look to it. Then go to your colors and grab the middle of the second column there and go over the top again, adding in some brighter tone, more towards the back end. We want the sort of highlights to kind of fade out into just like a white kind of ripple almost. But you can then come a little bit closer towards camera as always, and then just add in a bit more color here if you want to. Less streaky, the better, in terms of if you can break down some of those horizontal lines with like little lines like that, it will look great. And then go to your colors and grab the bottom color in that second column. We make our way towards the rear, a little bit more towards the left hand side, closer to the land, and just go along it a little bit. Bring the brush size down to around about 4% and just see if you can add in some little additional details in the water. Some bright little tones in here. Again, you can maybe add like a little bit along the water's edge as well in certain areas. Show how the water's just hitting along some of those stones. They look lovely. There we go. A couple of little dashes along there. We'll do the same along this edge as well. We'll just add in like a little bit along the water's edge just to kind of show the current as it comes down, probably crashes onto that side over there and then starts to flow down in a bit more of a towards us direction. A little daps here and there. Little bits on top of some of those teal colors that you created, little something like that. And then you should end up with a lovely little stream running through, or river running through your scene. Let's go ahead and turn off our drawing guide. Let's go ahead and pinch with 2 fingers, go full screen with 4, and we end up with today's finished design. So I hope you enjoyed today's tutorial. As always, make sure to tag me in your finished creations wherever you decide to share them. And if you didn't already know, I post weekly tutorials here on my YouTube channel, so make sure to subscribe. But if you want even more tutorials from me, you can come and join me over on Patreon, where I post 3 exclusive tutorials every single month to my Patreon supporters, and their catalogue sits at well over 100 at the time of recording. And you can see every single design of a tutorial that I've created over on my website, so you can take a look before you join. I'll leave a link to both of those in the description down below. And if you like this video here on YouTube, you'll love this one on the screen now. Thank you so much for watching. Have a wonderful day, and I'll see you in the next one.